Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Duromina wash processed Ethiopia from Koppi Coffee Roasters. And there's the container right there. And Koppi, based out of Helsingborg, Sweden. And this is part 11 of our 24-part KaffeBox Advent Calendar series, and our second coffee from Koppi in the Advent Calendar. I was extremely curious to see which coffee they were going with, as I've had my eye on two of their current offerings, the first of which being the Dilgi Chelbesa, which was featured in the Advent Calendar last year and is my favorite Koppi coffee that I've ever had, so I definitely wanted an opportunity to try that coffee again. But the other coffee I had my eye on was this Duromina right here, as it very much sounds like my type of Ethiopian coffee, so I'm pretty curious to see how this one will turn out. Again, the way that this works, the notes and tasting are made with the V60. This cup right here is made with the Chemex, and Koppi does have a loose brew guide on their website, which roughly translates to a 16.67 to 1 water to coffee ratio. We opted for 96 degrees Celsius, about 205 degrees Fahrenheit. Now in terms of roast profile, this one right here is definitely lighter than the previous Koppi coffee we've had. It's actually lighter than a lot of the Koppi coffees I've had recently, but even then there's still a slight bit of development to the cup. With all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. First impression, and this impression just came from both the grinding of the coffee itself as well as the brew, because it does have a very lovely peachy aroma to the cup. So I was fully expecting a lot of the peachiness right at the forefront of the coffee, and while there was a slight peachy aspect to the cup, it did quickly transition into a lot of the listed black tea-like aspects that they have on the coffee. In addition to that, it transitioned to a slight bit of a honey and citric florality before finishing yet again in a stone fruit-like finish. Now, one thing I really want to highlight is that none of these were overly pronounced at any point. It was actually a quick transition, and it was quite fleeting with a lot of those flavor profiles. However, the coffee was quite well defined, so they were pretty distinct and notable, even if they weren't the most lasting or vibrant. Additional aspects to the coffee did include both a jammy as well as fresh stone fruit-like aspect, so they do have both a peach and an apricot note listed on here. Makes a lot of sense. You're able to kind of pick out both of those stone fruit aspects within it while also being somewhat separate from themselves. But in addition to that, there is a brightness that's present right from the start in the coffee, and it does linger through what feels like a relatively short finish within the coffee itself. One other thing is that the cup does continue to improve as it cools down, reaching about room temperature. I've experienced this coffee to be at its best. However, even then, it's not necessarily the most vibrant or pronounced coffee. And kind of looking at this overall, it's not too surprising because that's been my previous experiences with Koppi's coffees. Oftentimes I describe them as being very pretty coffees. They often come out very tame, and I have a little bit of difficulty pulling out a lot of the notes that they have listed on their coffees because none of them are ever necessarily the most pronounced or vibrant notes. And for that reason, I typically don't necessarily feel that the Chemex is going to be a huge improvement on those coffees. But honestly, they've been about the same. The Chemex has been just as vibrant as the V60 has. Not too much that's been taken away from it, but honestly, if I felt that there was one brew method that was going to get a lot more vibrancy from this coffee, it's definitely the V60, as I feel like there are some adjustments that could be made to really bring out a lot more of the peachy aspects to it. But yeah, I would need a little bit more of the coffee to work with on this one. So for right now, we will go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we were getting. And 3 level 4s, so let's go through those real quick. The cleanliness level 4. Yes, very clean cup of coffee, washed Ethiopian coffee. You would definitely expect it to have that level 4 mark. One nice compliment I wanted to say about this coffee is that while it may not necessarily be the most strong or vibrant coffee, it definitely has a very defined profile to it. So I was easily able to pick out a lot of the flavor profiles within this coffee, so that does greatly contribute to the wonderful clarity that is in this coffee. Acidity, level 4. That one's a little surprising for me. I don't know if I necessarily expected this coffee to come out as bright as it did, but it definitely was a more bright coffee in general, so for that reason, it did justify that level 4 on the acidity. Stone fruit, level 4, and this one's kind of interesting because this is relative to the rest of the tasting wheel. Now, by most other coffee standards, this is something that would maybe be a secondary or tertiary factor because it wasn't the most pronounced aspect to the coffee. But given how it was relative to the rest of this tasting wheel, it did earn itself that level 4 mark, likely because it was at the forefront as well as the finish and the most defined and pronounced characteristic within this coffee. A bunch of level 3s, we'll start with the savoriness. Level 3, black tea-like aspect in this coffee, definitely the second most pronounced characteristic for me. And that's likely because right in the middle of this coffee, it was very well defined to it as well. So I definitely feel that's right there at that level 3 mark. Body, level 3, that one was probably the biggest surprise of this coffee because I oftentimes wonder maybe between a 2 and a 3, but this one was significantly closer to that 3 mark. So kind of surprised, had a little bit more body than expected, especially given a slightly less concentrated recipe. Finish, level 3, that's one thing I've been discussing throughout the time of this coffee, is that the finish was somewhat fleeting. It was a very quick finish. So I think that was probably compounded by the fact that this coffee wasn't necessarily the most pronounced or vibrant to begin with. So for that reason, the finish was just kind of short lasting. Sweetness, level 3. Yes, I think the first sip, I'm like, this coffee has great potential, and I feel like there's a way to get a lot more of the sweetness from this coffee. It would take a little bit more time to work with, but as of right now, the best I could get was that level 3 in terms of the sweetness. Florality, level 3. That was actually a really nice factor in this coffee because it does have a wonderful honey floral component to it, as well as a slight citric florality as well. So really like that level 3 mark for the florality. And as mentioned, the citric fruits right there at that level 3 mark. I would say that maybe it has to do a little bit with the brightness, nothing necessarily too defined in terms of that citric aspect. It just did feel a little citric. But again, given that this tasting wheel is all relative, and since a lot of these profiles were a little bit more diluted, I would say that that's the reason it reached that level 3 mark, not that it was an overly citric cup of coffee. Not too much different from the Chemex, honestly. As I mentioned, they were extremely similar regardless of the brew method. So I think that this tasting wheel actually looks good for either brew method on this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee, I thought it was fine. It's, again, very much in line with my previous Koppi experiences that sometimes I really want to bring out the best of these coffees. I feel like there's a lot of potential. This one, honestly, I felt like there was more potential in than a lot of the other Koppi coffees I've had because I was able to experience some wonderful peachiness to the cup, but I think that was kind of teasing because I wanted to pull out so much more of that, and had I been able to, then I feel like this would have been one of the better coffees I've had from the advent calendar up to this point. But I still really liked the Digi Chelbesa from Koppi last year a lot more than I liked this coffee. I feel like that one had the sweetness and clarity that I've been looking for in a lot of their coffees. So this one right here may not have had it, but I feel like with a little bit of tinkering and adjustments, you could really pull out all of the wonderful aspects that are hidden underneath this cup. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to, and it's kind of the type of person I would suggest a lot of Koppi's coffees to. People that like the really pretty coffees, the ones that have great structure to them, that are maybe not the most vibrant or pronounced cups, because this one right here, it has all of these factors, but they're not going to really dominate the cup. They're not going to be overly lasting. They're just going to kind of give you a slight bit of it, while at the same time finishing a little bit more even and equal without anything that might overpower the rest of the coffee. And I've always really liked the clarity from Koppi's coffee, so that's another positive to it. And maybe you're not necessarily the biggest fan of the sweetness while keeping some of the brightness within the cup. All of those factors kind of put together would make this the type of coffee I would suggest for you. I think for the most part, I'll leave this review at that. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, we'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. And this right here has been a review of the Duromina wash process Ethiopia from Koppi Coffee Roasters. Thank you for watching.